Hello and welcome back inside the Parc Fermé for podcast number 799. Just one away from 800. It is the Dutch Grand Prix review. This is Todd.
No, Todd, not now.
AKA Negative Camber. You know how we do these race review weekends.
We watch one, then we talk about it. Then we watch one, then we talk about it. Come on, Todd.
That's exactly what we do. But before doing that, I have to introduce my co-host, a professional driver, sporting manager of a real racing team. He actually knows what he's talking about. You know who it is.
Wrecked from out of the wasteland. He's bad, he's beautiful, he's crazy.
Hello, everybody. This is Paul Charles, the International.
Paul, I'm impressed. You've got a little bit of a hiatus here. You've been going back to back to back racing with the Harder Racing. Have you had a full week off? That's amazing.
That is amazing. It's never off because I'm not at the races doesn't mean I'm working, that's for sure. But yeah, it is nice not to have to hop on a plane, I guess. Although, when I hop on a plane and go to a race, that's not so shabby either, right? But
right.
Yeah, it is nice to get a little time at home for sure and hang out. Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, for sure. Especially this long weekend too. So
even
my wife's allowed to be home.
Yeah, long weekend. So that's really good. Mm-hmm. That's exciting. But the bummer is the Bauhaus concert was canceled.
Yep, Peter Murphy.
Peter, get well.
Yeah, please.
Do us all
Don't
a
mess
favor,
around with that stuff, man. Just get on with it.
Yeah, bad stuff. Yeah,
bad stuff. Yeah.
All right, Paul. We had the Dutch Grand Prix this weekend. We've got a lot to talk about. Let's jump in to the race review, shall we? Let's not mince words. Let's not quibble. Let's just jump into this.
Let's not throw flares at the situation.
Yeah, let's not bring our orange smoke to this podcast. Man, if I was a fan sitting in the grandstands and like a dude 3 rows ahead of me set one of those off and I couldn't see squat, I mean, I would be furious.
Oh, yeah. And they said, they're supposed to hand them in. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, is that? Yeah, because if you're going there with them, you're like, you're asking me, I will hand you my flare. No.
Yeah.
Didn't happen, right?
Sorry, sir.
It really nearly screwed with Verstappen because that one flare that went on during qualifying could have stopped him getting pole.
Yeah, no doubt.
That would have been like the guy catching the ball at was it the Cubs or whatever? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Baseball game. That guy had to move out of town.
Yeah. He became the Michael Massey of baseball, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
They were going to destroy that guy. They're going to kill him.
They were ready to, yeah.
That's crazy.
I remember that well.
Oh, my. All right. Well, it is the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, a fun track with bank turns in 3 and 14. Let me try that in English. So let's do a little table setting. All right. So let me try to set the table anyway. Reviewing the race, I think there are a few factors to consider. First, Mercedes seemed to be relatively on par with Ferrari and Red Bull. And we kind of knew this. We knew Spa was not going to flatter their car, but we knew that Zandvoort would, right? And so there's no big shock there. But, they seem to be within 2-3 tenths, something-ish around that on balance at Zandvoort, which is really good news for them. And that's, as such, I think the other element is how gentle the Merc is on their tires, which in some races they struggle to get them in the heat window and struggle to get heat in the tires. Mm-hmm. But in other situations, in other tracks, and other temperatures, this actually, helps them, right?
Right.
Depending on how hot it is or whatever.
Yep.
And this presented them with a hard compound option that most of the teams, and definitely Red Bull, did not really want, and didn't really have and didn't really want. Red Bull certainly wasn't comfortable on the hard compounds, although Alpine was, like Mercedes, they were comfortable on the hard compound. So a couple elements there. They were closer in pace, outright pace, with Ferrari and Red Bull. They had a hard compound option that their car was doing really well with, that they discovered on Friday, which was good for them. And as such, this presented Merc with a one-stop option, while traditional approach here would be a two-stopper, avoiding the hard compound for Red Bull and Ferrari. So for them, it was soft, medium, soft. For both of the Mercs, it was medium hard. as a one stopper, right? So automatically going into this race, Mercedes a little closer in pace, had this hard option, one stopper. These are the kind of strategy things that that make Formula One fun and was going to make them competitive, or at least give them a shot, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was good. As Ferrari's Carlos Sainz found out, by the third lap, tire management was a major issue. So let's keep all of this in mind, as well as the virtual safety car and actual safety car, which made for a very, what I would call, strategy-rich race that had all the teams glued to their abacus, the entire race. And it's what made it exciting for me anyway, Paul.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to it. I told you before the race, I said, I'm ready for this one. This is going to be a good one. It proved to be true. I mean, the track is different from all the other tracks, which is awesome. The drivers really have to work at it. You never really got a breath. And a lot of those corners have a lot of commitment to them. It's not like they're going through a bunch of Mickey Mouse turners onto a main straight. They're working the whole time. And so that works the tire hard as well, obviously. Even just watching the practices and qualifying, you saw Red Bull was struggling a little bit, getting the handling on the car. I saw one of the laps in qualifying, I think Max was just laying it all out there. And even though his pole lap was a little more tidy, they definitely felt like they were being chased very closely by both the Ferraris and the Mercedes. So, it was brewing up to be a phenomenal race. And I think in the end, that's kind of what we got. Unexpected turn of events during the race, but I think overall the race was eventful no matter what.
Yeah. Certainly everything was a little tighter at the sharp end of the grid for sure. As it turns out, Max Verstappen and Red Bull, Max takes the win in P1. His teammate Sergio Perez down in P5. Max took the lead at the start, kept enough distance between him and Leclerc to stay out of DRS trouble. When Ferrari boxed Leclerc to go on to the mediums on lap 17, Red Bull did the same thing on lap 18, so they covered that move, right? And as Leclerc is his closest competitor, you would expect him to do that. Now, the intriguing part of this for me was that Lewis and George on mediums were able to keep pace with the soft shod cars of Carlos and Sergio. So despite them being on hards, and you might argue that in other tracks, other surfaces, that hard delta between it and the soft compounds could be up to a second. That wasn't the case here. So a key factor here is that Lewis and George on hards were keeping absolute pace with Sergio and Carlos, right? When both Max and Charles boxed, this left the Mercs running 1-2. And while Max clawed them back and passed George and was about to pass Lewis, the Mercs boxed for hards, leaving Max in the lead. But it became clear, Paul, when Lewis and George rejoined the track, that Max didn't have the needed 21-second delta to cover his final stop that he was going to need. And so this meant, or at least looked like, he was going to have to battle his way back past the Mercs if he wanted to win, right? And Max most likely would have stopped and came out behind Lewis around 7 seconds or so with brand new softs. So he'd be a couple of seconds quicker a lap initially. And then his car was much better straight line speed. It was a quicker car. They had the longer, more powerful DRS zone here, a second DRS zone here installed as well. And so there's really not a lot of doubt in my mind anyway that he would have caught them and most likely passed them in the long DRS zone for the win. But to be fair, that wasn't a given. And that certainly isn't how Merck saw this unraveling anyway, right? So the situation ultimately, though, was neutralized when Yuki Tsunoda stopped on track, bringing out the virtual safety car, which gave Max a free stop and the lead. And it created a host of tinfoil hat conspiracies, with Toto Wolff sort of dog whistling the same after the race. But I'll talk about Yuki's issues when we get to the AlphaTauri review. The reality is, the virtual safety car wasn't that. I mean, it was timed poorly for Max too, because it forced him to take on hard tires, which they didn't want. The car doesn't really like those hard tires, but that's what they had to do. And as it turns out, the Mercs stopped for mediums. So now they had the slight advantage. I don't know that it was enough of an advantage to reel Max in and pass him in the remaining 20 laps, but that's where they were. All of that changed though 8 laps later when Valtteri Bottas poked his parked his car. Got to be careful there. Sounded sexual. When he parked his car, bringing out the safety car, the actual safety car. And this was a key moment for Red Bull and Mercedes. As the safety car brought the cars through pit lane to avoid Bottas's recovery, the pit stops were even more advantageous and easier. So Red Bull ceded the position to Merck by boxing Max for fresh softs, which his car likes much, much better. And this left him behind Lewis for a restart as Mercedes chose to keep Lewis out to guard track position. And it became sort of shades of Abu Dhabi all over again there. But at the restart, Max passed Lewis, Lewis apparently had the wrong engine mode selected for the restart, and Max took the win. But it was difficult to watch that sometimes at home because all of that strategy, Paul, was unfolding in real time, But I remember you told me, you were texting me during the race. It's like, ooh, Mercedes could go all the way on the hards. You were reading it. So it was funny watching you text me in real time. You were reading this strategy as it unfolded right before. But that's how I saw it. How'd you see it? You're on mute, or I can't hear you. Sorry.
Sorry, you told me to mute myself afterwards. My foul mouth in the preamble.
Yeah. Why would you F me so bad?
You and you.
You.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I said that was a lot of words there, but it seems like a lot happened in this race, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
Definitely did. It was. I mean, I think the Red Bull, it came off on his back foot in day one. Finally, he got it on pole, and it was probably the best car on track at that time, but not by a country mile at all. So any little miscues in strategy and things happening on the track could have easily, turned the tail on him. So ultimately, Red Bull called every change perfectly, and it kind of fell in their lap also when it looked like Mercedes actually could have done something. And I really think they could have done something, as you said, most likely, but it wasn't written in stone that Max could have run them down and passed them. And with the strategy, when they ended up on the mediums and the hards, could Lewis and Russell have run him down? Maybe, right? I mean,
hard to know.
We saw that the Red Bull wasn't exactly full of pace on the hard, so it was losing ground at that point in time. Would Lewis have lost the edge on the tires by the time he got there? Maybe, but it was still going to be a fight.
Yeah.
And I think Mercedes calls were actually really good.
They were good.
They were ahead in strategy, and then something else happened. They went behind. They got ahead in strategy, and all of a sudden, in the end, they ended up behind, unfortunately. So I don't think Mercedes actually did anything wrong at all. I mean, the only thing they could have done was, just kind of like, there's no way Max is going to go through the pits and not change tires right now. So, and called Lewis. That's the only strategy change I think that Mercedes could have done different or should have done any different than they did. But ultimately, Max did what he needed to do in qualifying, which was tough. I think him getting that pole was very important, because if he hadn't, I think it would have been a whole different race, because I don't think he had as big an advantage as he has done in the past here. So I think he had to fight for everything he had. And as I said, I think the Red Bull team called the strategy absolutely perfectly for the situations as they evolved, and ultimately put him in the right place at the right time at the end.
Yeah, it all needed to sort of fall, I guess, a certain way for Max, right?
Yeah.
But this is, that Red Bull strategy team, certainly Hannah Schmidt, it was just a fabulous call. But I'm glad you mentioned, because I think James Vowles at Mercedes had fabulous strategy too.
Yeah, I think they did.
I think he did a great job too. Just that last safety car caught him out. But, as Toto said, they gambled. So, Max took advantage of it. He had to execute, which he did. He stayed calm. When they told him to box and cede the lead with just a few laps left for softs, that was a lot of work they were asking Max to do, and you never really knew, had Lewis got those mediums lit up again, they had some work to do there.
If they could have held it for a couple of laps, I think Max, it would have been a lot harder. Plus, he would have kept Russell close back behind him also, which would have helped Lewis's goal there, because Russell would have kept Max busy. But in the end, the engine mode and a heads up restart by Max kind of sealed the deal way too early for Mercedes to make that work.
Yeah, well, let's get to Mercedes first. Let me talk about Perez. Perez just wasn't really firing on all cylinders over the weekend. Yeah, it was kind of a ho-hum qualifying performance, and in the end, he only had a set of mediums left at the last stop that he couldn't hold off signs. But thankfully, Carlos had that 5-second penalty for unsafe release and handed Sergio P5. But really off the pace. Not a good weekend.
No, surprising. This being a track where maybe the team didn't have the best match with the tire for that track.
Yeah,
right. Thought Perez would have been actually a bit better off there because he's very good at managing tires. But the past few weeks he's just been a bit off the boil, as has Sainz at Ferrari. So the number twos are kind of whimpering a little bit. Not so for Mercedes, but who we'll get to in a second, obviously. So a bit disappointed in Carlos. I'm not sure what is going on right there, but he's shown a lot of promise most of the year, but the last 2-3 races he's just kind of been an also ran for that team, and that's not what they need.
You're talking about Sergio. Yeah. And I think the one thing I thought he did well is tried to hold Lewis up.
Yeah.
And he's always good at that.
Yes.
Fight like a bull. Yeah. So he did that. So I thought that was good. All right. Let's see. Let's talk about Mercedes. You had Lewis Hamilton in P4, George Russell in P2. I think Mercedes was very cunning in that they found the hard compound tire worked well on their car. And while they didn't have the outright pace to win the race, with some very crafty strategy and tires performing well and good tire management and good pace, they may have had a shot at this one. And I think that's how it was setting up a little bit. It looked as if it was going to be that was going to unfold perfectly for them, as Max would need another stop, which would put him behind them, and they'd defend for the win. All was working very well on that initial strategy call. And that strategy, again, I thought was spot on. Lewis was looking good until the free stop for Max under the virtual safety car. That was the first blow to their strategy. But to Paul's point, they did tack, redid their strategy, came back. The second blow then came with that safety car when the team gambled for track position by leaving Lewis out, and unfortunately he had the engine in the wrong mode during the restart, which allowed Max to quickly dispatch of him on fresher tires. But even if he hadn't had the wrong mode, Max, I think, would have got by him anyway. Such was the pace delta on those soft compounds versus Lewis's worn mediums. The virtual safety car forced Mercedes from a one-stopper to a two-stopper, and even then they may have had a chance, but the safety car pushed their strategy again, and then they gambled with Lewis and lost out. George, read this right, Paul. He saw the opportunity for a cheap stop under the safety car because they were all coming through the pit lane. And so if a safety car pit stop is a cheap stop, being part of the safety car process of bringing him through the pit lane is even cheaper. Right?
Yeah. It's barely anything.
It's 3 seconds, right?
Yeah.
And so George realized Leclerc was quite a ways back, and he said, and as he was trying to get, I think it was Albon, he was waving Albon, speed up, get in the pit lane, And the reason is he said he was losing way too much temperature behind the safety car on those mediums, and he was going to be dead. And so he wanted to go to those soft tires. And so he drove in calling for softs, which the team put on, and it dropped him behind Max in third. But with the new tires, to be fair to Mercedes, they both, you and I had texted about this, they covered both eventualities. They covered track position and defending, and they covered tire compound and health and attack position, right, with George. And so George was on fresh soft, just like Max. So he was going to go full attack. Lewis on the mediums, had he been able to let those properly warm up and get them in the window quickly, he was going to be defending. And, it's 2 against 1 here, right? Or at least that's kind of how it looked to me. And as it turns out, that's not how it happened. I think it was a good call on George's part, is he and Max dispatched Lewis down to 3rd, where then Charles Leclerc mugged him and left him in 4th. But Paul, a lot has been made of this call, and many castigating George as being selfish and not following the team orders. But it was absolutely the right call, because F1 drivers are selfish, and George isn't here to play wingman to Lewis. He's here to win. And I loved the call by George because it reminded me of, oh, that's right, Lewis Hamilton in 2007 at the Hungaroring and Monaco, right? So this is what champions do. He had he was behind Lewis. He saw what, Max was going to be doing. It was the right read, his heads up.
Yeah, I mean, and there's no luck, or what should I say? There was premeditated use of words there to get those tires on his car.
Yeah.
Right. He's not like, I need the softs on so I can attack Lewis, and Max is like, oh no, I'm losing temperature. I'm going to be vulnerable to everyone behind. I need the softs. So, like, quick, let him in. Right. But I mean, he's not there to back up Lewis. If Lewis was, fighting tooth and nail with Max for the championship, I'd say fair enough.
Of course.
But that's not how the championship is, and that's not where Lewis is in the championship. So there's no reason to sacrifice Russell just to protect for Lewis.
Right.
Mercedes and both those drivers are not in that position.
George is ahead in the Drivers' Championship.
Right, and Russell is the future. Lewis, still has a future also, but you don't discount George. You don't bring him down and make him the backup. That's not who you want George Russell to be. And as I said, very thought out words that you used to make sure that there was no argument for this tire change. It was definitely the right call for him and ultimately for the team. I feel I get track position. And I think maybe Lewis could have held out for a couple laps, but in the end, there was no way he was going to hold off Max Verstappen, who's got a tire advantage and a straight line position advantage at this track
with a long DRS zone.
Right. So it wasn't really going to work. I understand that they thought maybe he could hold him off. I don't think it was really a legitimate shot, but okay, fair enough. You go for a win rather than go for 2 spots on the podium, which ultimately would have happened if they'd all pitted for softs at that moment in time. Right. And they would have given up the lead. They don't want to do that. That's something teams generally don't like to do, to just kind of give way and give up a potential win, because I think all things being equal and all equal tires, Max was going to stay ahead of those guys anyway. So yeah, I got no issue. In fact, I applaud it and I encourage Russell to keep doing those things. And I think if Lewis had not had the wrong engine mode, he may have been able to hold off Max for a couple extra laps, and that may have actually helped Russell in the fight against Max, which may in turn have helped given Lewis enough time to actually warm up his tires. But ultimately, a mistake by Lewis allowed Verstappen just to walk by on the restart, and the race was over for him at that point in the potential win. So that's
I was a little surprised where he restarted too, because I was thinking he was gonna, as he was getting ready and he was really kind of holding him back, which you do. And he was coming around that final corner. I thought, oh, he's going to go to the line because he's going to neutralize the long straight for the toe. Right. So he's going to go to the line, but he didn't. He started right before the final turn. Yeah. And it's a banked turn, right? So he started right there, and Max is, going crazy, full throttle, going around that bank turn, comes off that final bank. Now, unfortunately, he's in the wrong engine mode, but he instantly got a tow, almost to the point where Max had to lift off so he didn't pass him before the start-finish line, right? Yeah, I mean, ultimately on the restarts, you try and look in the mirrors if you're in the front. You look to see what
angle of attack the front wheels are at. That's what I
Mhm.
do. Try and find a point where if they're warming up their tires or they're in a turn and you're just coming out of the turn, you can be as straight as possible and therefore be able to utilize the full power of the engine to get that little bit of advantage. But as you said, when he went, Max went at the same time, and because it was in that banking, there wasn't going to be that deficit of grip level at that
Yeah.
point, and so that's why Max flew on by. But yeah, ultimately you want to be as straight as possible and hopefully try and allow your competitor to be as angled as possible when you go for that throttle, so that then they can't actually use their full power on the throttle initially trying to catch you on the restart. And that's exactly what Lewis didn't do. But Lewis is 7-time champion. I mean, maybe there's other things going on there that maybe we're not aware of that
For
he
sure.
needed to do because of the tire temperature, etc.
Yeah.
But ultimately, he was a sitting dog, and they went by. But that said, I think Lewis had a fantastic race up until that point, and the calls from the Mercedes were brilliant, and that they'd really put him in a couple of spots during this race for him to win the race, and he was doing an excellent job of doing it. That one little foul up, one little unlucky, I would call it, last safety car kind of took a lot of their potential away. But overall, I think it was a phenomenal turnaround for Mercedes, and made for a thrilling race of 3 manufacturers going for a win.
Yeah, and certainly the emotions are high, and I think Lewis got on the radio and he was F-bombing his crew, and
there's no place for that.
Yeah, I know emotions run high, and I certainly I get it, but he's a 7-time champ because the men and women at that team have sacrificed a lot.
And done a lot of great things for him.
And done a lot of great things over the last 8 years that's afforded him the car in which to win 7 championships or 5, or 6, but at Mercedes. But I think, so, you got to be a little measured, and I understand he's mad, he's pissed, and it's salt in the wound to have your young teammate blow by you too. That's not fun. And I don't think any person that has dominated a sport like that, as you get older and the young guns come in, that's not always an easy thing either, because I think Lewis, on the surface of it is just, he's phenomenally talented and quick. So I think it's not a case, put him out to pasture or anything like that. I just think that was a little unbecoming. I think if you guys had gambled on a strategy and it didn't work, and one of your drivers in the Aston Martin came on and started F-bombing you, I'm assuming that wouldn't go over well.
No, it wouldn't go down too well. And I mean, it's fine to be upset, but it's not fine to be abusive.
Yeah.
And it makes the language that you use when you're celebrating everyone maybe a little less powerful to me.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? If this is how you, I don't know. I understand frustration, but he's done it enough that he's not Yuki, right?
Yeah, that's right.
He's done it enough that he knows the ups and downs of racing, and the team. And he should have read that the team had put him in a couple of great positions to win that race, and unfortunately things beyond their control put them backwards. So I don't think there was any place for that kind of verbiage, really.
It's pretty tough because if he runs wide and breaks a floor piece or tears up a front wing, you don't have the engineer coming on the radio saying, I cannot believe you guys that you just did that, Lewis. We worked so hard getting that front wing made and put on that car, and you just destroyed it, right? You guys effed me. Again, I get it. Heat of the moment, your emotions run. It's the same thing with Alonso's, his review of Lewis, and Alonso apologized, and here's the upside. Lewis knew it after he calmed down. He apologized, and he felt bad about it. And I think after the race, I think he saw it the way you did, Paul. I think he said, look, I was mad and I get it, but there were a lot of positive for us to take out of this race. There was a lot of things that went right for us. And so I think he saw it, once he sort of calm down. Anybody would be really upset in a situation like that. So anyway, that's how it unfolded for Mercedes. Now let's talk about Ferrari. Oh boy.
Again.
It kills me. It just kills me. I'm a Ferrari fan, so oh boy.
They got blinkers on though. Binotto's blinkers on. I mean, I don't know what the statements he keeps making about, and I guess Rosberg said something that Formula 2 and Formula 3 teams did better pit stops than there, and he was like,
and better strategy in pit stops.
Yeah, Rosberg doesn't know how hard it is, and this and that. I'm not changing one person on the team and this and that. It's like, what? He's like, we called the pit stop too early. Okay, well, there's one person wrong, or a group of people wrong, saying let's bring him in now. And also the default where the crew can say we won't be ready. If we call it keep them out. There's people in the group in the pit lane that have the authority to do that too. So
right.
There's a lot of mistakes going on in there that they need to face, and it may be personnel, it may be structure, it may be all kinds of things, but it's definitely, I think it's not rosy there. It really isn't. And him saying, I'm not going to change anything. Well, then that is exactly the reason why these things happen at every race nearly, it seems nowadays. There's got to be a shakeup. Something has to change, whether you like someone, don't like someone. If you think it's this or it's bad luck or whatever, you have to grab this thing and be as tight on it as possible till they figure it out, and then you can kind of let them get on with it again. But you cannot just kind of let them keep making mistakes like this again and again.
Yeah, there's I understood he said right now having consistent personnel and not a bunch of changes is stability is what we need, right? Now here's the reason I say that. And yes, I'm a Ferrari fan, but I'm trying to be realistic about this. So when Vettel went there, they went through this massive senior management shakeup. Everybody was fired. And I maintain that was part of the reason Vettel never really achieved what he wanted out of Ferrari, because the whole team was in complete disarray during that era. Yeah. And now they finally, they got rid of Arriva Bene and all this stuff. So they get Binotto in there, who is the last man standing, So they get rid of all their senior executive management, fire everybody, and the last technician that's standing is Binotto, right? Yeah. So they move him there. And to their credit, they fielded a pretty damn good car this year.
Absolutely.
So I guess maybe I could forgive him for being a little shell-shocked about big management structure changes and the impact it had on the team, because he would have lived through all that. So, and it's not like he's not a political beast. I'm sure he knows, what buttons to push at Ferrari. Yeah. So, it's a difficult situation, but I agree with you. I think it's not getting it done. You can't have this kind of thing happening on a regular basis.
I think say you're not going to do anything about it.
No, you got to say, we're going to look at it. I mean, worst case scenario, we need to take a long look at that.
Yeah.
I think Nico, look, if Nico's mission was to be the most controversial pundit out there, then, he's succeeding. He's doing a good job, but that's a little harsh.
Talking about Lewis and Mercedes. So.
Yeah, right. Well, Lewis, I'd be pissed off. I'd be F-bombing the whole team.
What are they doing to Lewis?
Like, well, so no, crazy. Wait a minute. Yeah. Wait a minute. He quickly changed his tune on Lewis, didn't he? JB is calling balls and strikes, but Nico all of a sudden,
to a degree, JB was still kind of
a little bit. Yeah,
and they raced with him. Maybe they're all buddies at this point or whatever. But
I don't think JB is.
No,
I'm sure they get along fine, but I don't know. I think JB is a little more practical. But so anyway, yes, Ferrari. If I'm honest, Charles just didn't have the pace to take the fight to Max. Yeah. And while he mirrored Max's strategy, the pace just wasn't there. And he even lost a position to Mercedes, their one-stopper. So he lost a position there. Thankfully, he was able to get that back past Lewis. to nab the final step of the podium, which is good. But just struggled with the pace. Didn't have the pace in the car, and I think really before we get to Carlos, I think for Charles, it just he never really could, he couldn't close in on Max. He couldn't get in the DRS zone. He couldn't make a run for it. I'm watching him the last two races, and Carlos a little less so because he's had issues. But the bigger issue for me, I'm wondering, watching Charles, is I think Ferrari looks as if it was impacted quite a bit by the flexi floor technical change over the summer. Because it seems to me they've lost quite a bit of pace to Red Bull. If they're not careful, they're going to lose third in the constructors to Mercedes.
Yeah.
And remember, I said going into the Belgian Grand Prix that you couldn't draw a definitive on how much that technical regulation impacts all the teams, because Spa's a different kind of track. And so it would take a kind of a Spa performance, and it would take a Zandvoort performance and a couple of tracks to see how they do on a power circuit, how they do on some medium speed. And it just looks like Ferrari, I don't know, it looks like they've lost a little pace to me. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think they've got pace in the car. They just don't have longevity in that pace. I think that's why the qualifying was so crucial. If Charles could have got ahead of Max, he may have been able to control that deg and pace, but he couldn't, right? I mean, Max knows what he needs to do at the beginning of the race. If he's in the lead, he needs to get out of that 1 second range before DRS kicks in. And Charles, after 3 laps, I think the deg and the tires start even kicking in at that point, and even though he's fighting to get into DRS range, he could never quite get there.
Right.
And by that time, the deg kicked in more because he was pushing so hard to get into the DRS. You're kind of lunging at the DRS zone to try and get in there, and he couldn't get in there. And then that in turn forced his pace to deteriorate, and then he just Max started to get a gap on him, and that's what I think the car does suffer from more than anything. Not one lap pace, but definitely been able to keep the tires under it, which may well be a part of what you're talking about with the floor. I don't know what their issue is at this moment in time, because they've started off with a bit of tire deg issues, then they fixed it and seemed to be a strong point. Now it's a negative again.
Yeah, it feels like it. I don't have anything definitive or insider info. It's just a gut feel, really. It seems like they have. For Carlos, last minute called a box to cover a powerful undercut by Perez left the team unprepared, and it relegated Carlos to basically an also-ran position. He did claw his way back up to 5th, but lost that because of the unsafe release. Again, another team error. So you have a team error on the pit stop with no tire ready for the back left, and then you've got a pit stop and unsafe release, another team error. In the end, I think the race was a lot more challenging and complex. I appreciate what Nico Rosberg claims, that strategy and pit stops are better for an F3 team than Ferrari, and I understand that. I do think it was a kind of tough race. A lot of strategy changes, a lot of stuff going on. It's a weak spot for Ferrari, though, clearly. And I agree that Carlos Sainz stop is not a good look for them.
Yeah, execution is a problem. And it is. Honestly, they were lucky not to get 15 seconds of penalty, because I guess you said that in that run up to the yellow flag, I thought Carlos was clearly, passing under yellow. Maybe he got the nose in front at that line.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, maybe that's that. But running over also that air gun sitting out there on the corner, I guess I don't know how the rule book reads, but anywhere else you have to keep your equipment tight in and not impede the other vehicles in the other boxes untowardly. If you're out there changing the tire, that's one thing. But you're out there and that wheel gun is sitting out there on the corner of the box, that's a no-no in my book. It could potentially not be a on paper penalty, but it's definitely a process within the teams that you keep your, you pull your cords in when the other car's pulling out.
Yep.
You just stay out of their way. You don't impede them unnecessarily, so unless you're actually in that box doing something at that moment in time. So I'm really surprised that there wasn't anything done about that as well. But,
yeah, because it has to be that way,
right? It's execution right there. So.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's got to be that way, and especially in your world, given the number of cars you've got on pit lane, right?
Yeah.
So you have to guard that really, because otherwise people would make their pit boxes a mile wide. They'd have stuff at the very edges to prevent teams from getting a better launch.
You had your mom and your cousins out there.
Yeah, you would.
Waving, doing that. That baseball thing where they wave the things when you're or football kickers or whatever, just trying to distract everyone.
You would be.
Woo!
You'd have a guy stand at the very, very limit of the corner with the big sign, and,
we hate Sergio.
Right.
Like, what?
So you have to mandate that they've got to pull that in. But anyway, so
you got to keep it clean and safe. You got to keep it safe.
Yes,
that stuff that could have easily been a very dangerous.
It could have been
direction for Sergio, actually.
Yeah, it could have been that wheel. The cable could have got wrapped around the axle, could have hit the guy. It's hard to know. Yeah. Alpine and Fernando Alonso P6, Esteban Ocon P9. Ocon had a great start, jumped from 12th to 9th, lost ground during the first stops, but Ocon swapped places with Alonso a couple times. So it was Ocon ahead of Alonso, Alonso ahead of Ocon during their stops. But he ended up coming home in 9th. Although, as we just mentioned, Alpine did have questions about Carlos passing Ocon under yellow flags. But the stewards didn't see it that way, and he stayed 9th. And the only thing I can imagine is that by the time they got to the yellow flags, Carlos must have been slightly ahead of Ocon. I don't know if that's the reason. I haven't read an article that really unpacked that, but that's what I looked at when I rewatched it. So anyway, and then Alonso had a good battle with Norris for best of the rest, ended 7th, but inherited a spot from Carlos Sainz's penalty. And so on the race perspective, Paul, I thought Esteban, he had that good start, jumped up into the points, hung in the points there. And then Alonso, I thought, it kind of surprised me that they had reversed, but through that virtual safety car and safety car, it pretty much got reversed, and it was really 2 against 1. It was poor Lando and both Alpines trying to beat him up all afternoon.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, I think the Alpine, once again, still, their battle is with McLaren right now, and they're doing a great job of it. And I think, obviously, I'm sure Mercedes had some data on how good that hard tire would be on their car, but I think they should go kiss Alonso on the mouth for being the first one to leap onto it and proving how good that hard tire could be. They knew it was pretty good on their car, and then the evolution of the track was massive over the weekend. And so you don't really, what on Friday, but you don't really know what's going to happen on Sunday afternoon. And so I think Alonso really helped Mercedes feel confident about their move. But really, the balls are out for Alonso and the team for doing that first step and really proving the pace. Everyone was watching Alonso. And the good thing for him was because he was the first one to strike, he actually made a lot of ground up before everyone else started to change direction on what they want to do with their strategy. So I think, once again, a great job by Alonso. I mean, he just keeps impressing me all the time. I think I'm more of a fanboy of Alonso now than I was when he was winning championships right now, honestly.
Yeah.
He's just super impressive with everything he does. He's calculating what he says on the radio, how he behaves on track, and what he can do on track when he's really pushed to do it. Just great. And I know he's not going to be with the team. I'm kind of sad he's not going to be with that team next year, really. Because not only because of where he's going, but on where this team is headed as well. But I get that, he probably feels he's got a lot more years than Alpine were ready to give him, but I'm not sure he's not wrong at this point. But Esteban is doing a good job too. It's just he's up against a guy that, he's just one of the best ever. So
yeah, for sure. And you can still see that, even though he's back in 6th place, you can still see the earmarks of a champion all over his race. So, and let's talk about that just a little bit. I think it's worth mentioning. So, it was also revealed that Oscar Piastri was right, and Alpine did not have a contract with him. The contract recognition board said no. McLaren is at the contract with Piastri, and Alpine doesn't. So he's not bound to the team. And in the end, at first blush, and I tend to agree with Jensen. I think at first blush, without all the detailed stories that came out later from internal sources, I think JB was right when he said, "Yeah, you want to get the best team, or you think you're going to thrive the most. You just got to be careful because you don't want to make enemies in Formula One this early in your career."
Right.
And I thought,
Mr. Alex Palau.
yeah,
Oh.
yeah. Whoops. And I thought, that's some sage wisdom from a guy who, JB had his moments.
Yeah, he made that mistake.
He did.
Oh,
and and I think he had a really good point there. And so, but then as time went on over the weekend, it became more and more clear that ultimately it was Laurent Rossi, the head of Alpine, that he basically may have just fumbled around trying to be cute with Alonso and Piastri. And in the end, both of them pulled the rug out from under him, and he ends up losing both drivers.
Yeah.
And that's on him. And all I can say is welcome to the Piranha Club, Mr. Rossi.
Yeah.
Because you had Alonso, a two-time world champion, and you had Piastri,
who was potentially the best driver in Formula One right now. Yeah.
Right. So make a decision and go with it. But if you're trying to string everybody along and being too cute, and you're trying to plant Oscar over at Williams, when Williams has Nick DeVries, they'd probably like to plant there. And Alonso, who you think, well, he's old, dude. And it seems like to me, I could be totally wrong. It just seems like to me that Mr. Rossi had his backside handed to him by both of them. It's a hard lesson. And I agree with Ted Kravitz, who said, don't blame Otmar, because a lot of this happened before Otmar even got to that team. So I think Otmar now is left to pick up the pieces. And if I was senior management at Renault, I'd have a long look at Rossi on this one.
Right. Yeah. But what do you do? Yeah.
What do you do?
It's a game you play. There's a game of egos,
There is.
Yeah. He's kind of new to it. And so maybe they get caught out. But ultimately, when you make big statements, you need to have the facts right too. You can't just say, no, he's got a contract. It's like, well, if he doesn't, he doesn't.
He doesn't. Yeah. And I think that is now in hindsight, it's unfortunate because Oscar coming to Formula One should be one of the greatest moments for him.
Right.
And in the end, it is a terrible situation for him. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's going to get over that.
Oh yeah. No doubt.
I mean, but
that's just kind of a crappy deal.
It's kind of a crappy way to get in, but I think in the end, it's not really going to affect anything he does. I know that I think it was Jensen or somebody was saying, why would you go to McLaren when you were up against Lando Norris? You know what? If you're Piastri, you don't care. You're coming in. You've won championships already, 2 championships, F3, F2. You're ready to go to Formula One. You don't care who your teammate is because you feel like you can beat anybody.
That's
and I'm sure he does. And whether he can or he can't, I don't feel like it's, Lando is, the unbeatable man in the pit lane. Obviously, Ricciardo's had a bad day at the time of it, but I don't think it's because of anything Lando's doing, especially as much as something Ricciardo's not doing. So
yeah, I heard him say that, and then I saw a bunch of the British press parroting that in articles that they were posting. Piastri's really up against it because he's coming in, and effectively they were saying, Lando's firmly got his feet on the desk at that team. Yeah, he does, no doubt about it. And Lando is a rare talent. But, that didn't, hello, Lewis Hamilton walking into McLaren with Fernando Alonso, a 2-time champion.
Yeah, George Russell walking into Mercedes with Lewis and making a fair game of it.
Right.
I don't think Zach is bringing in Piastri to be a backup to Norris. They didn't bring Ricciardo to be a backup to Norris. They want to field 2 ultra competitive cars. And because Ricciardo wasn't bringing it, they needed the best driving option they could possibly find. That was Piastri. And they found a way to get him.
Yeah,
and
it's
hats
a
off to
brilliant
them.
move. Yeah,
And bad for Alpine that they let two great drivers. Obviously, Piastri's still got to prove it, but certainly one go by the wayside right when they're bringing their car up in level. So it's gonna be really hard to bring in someone better for Alpine right now. I'm not sure.
Well, there's certainly a lot of talk that they're going after Pierre Gasly, and that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense
Because Pierre's a veteran; he's been around long enough now. He's a quick driver. That makes sense. Although I guess that AlphaTauri isn't about to release Pierre unless they can get Colton Herta in their team, and the FIA has to consider giving him a super license, which that's a little weird because Colton Herta's had a hell of a lot of race time.
Yeah, it's really not about driver standard or speed or anything. It's really about how the FIA need to control and protect their own individual championships, which is kind of conflict of interest, right? They need to protect their ladder from F4 to F3 to F2, and kind of America's off to the side here doing its own thing that they don't have a ton of control over. They're involved in it, but they don't have a ton, because there's no reason why, honestly, an F1 driver and an IndyCar driver shouldn't be held at the same level,
right?
Or close to it. Where being an IndyCar winner should automatically get you in as a super license. If you're a midfielder in IndyCar, maybe you got to prove a little bit more. But as we've seen, when people come from F1 back over, they don't come up and just trounce everybody. It just doesn't happen.
No,
right?
No. In IndyCar, it doesn't say, let's see, Marcus Ericsson. I don't know if you can handle racing in this series. When an F1 driver comes over, they just walk into the paddock and they're driving, right?
Yeah, but they're not, but they're not dominating either. I mean, Marcus Ericsson's taken 3 years to actually have a sniff at a championship, and Alexander Rossi. I get that these weren't the creme de the creme of Formula One,
Grosjean,
but they were in Formula One.
Yeah,
not you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like they were allowed to be in Formula One and had the right to be in Formula One, even if they're, even Roman Grosjean, he's not even in top 10 in the IndyCar Championship, right? So these are all guys who had legitimately a right to be in Formula One. I don't see any reason why to hold back people like Colton Herta, anyone that's out there up front in IndyCar, to be allowed to jump directly over. I think it's, as I said, it's just about FIA protecting their system. Now, that being said, I understand the ladder system, and I think it's a fantastic thing for drivers to know how to get there. There was a time when there was F3 at Europe, F3 World Championship, there was Formula 4. There was a reason why they built this structure. I get that, and it should be protected to a certain point so drivers know what steps they have to take to get where they want to go. And the right people are racing against the right people in those series, right? You don't want someone racing F3 in Germany and then you have to try and figure out, are they as good as the F4 driver in Japan or something like that, right? The top drivers should be competing against each other, and that's what that ladder system pretty much does. F3, F4, F3, F2.
I agree.
Yeah, it's a tough call. A guy I know, Noel Siegel, he's in the Pro 2000, I think they nearly finished the season, but he's got a choice of going to Europe or doing Indy Lights or whatever. So it's a tough decision to make where you want to go, because you really are, if you go to Indy Lights, you're really kind of forcing yourself to the IndyCar side. It's not like Indy Lights is being held in the same place as F2, so you still have the same option if you succeed in F2 or in Indy Lights to go to Formula One. It's just not working that way. So
imagine the money's quite a bit different, though.
Yeah, I think a little bit different, but not unassailable by most people getting there, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about McLaren. Lando Norris in P7, Daniel Ricciardo in P17. Lando was hanging in there, holding off the Alpines for much of the race, but the virtual safety car ruined his one-stopper, and then the safety car lost him a place to Alonso. But it was 2 against 1 all day, and he did a terrific job on that front and ran well. I honestly, Paul, I don't know what to say about Dan. We've reached a point where his post-race commentary is now just sort of a word salad of buzz phrases like Well, we had pace on certain areas of the track, not others. The tires were in and out of the window, and we had degradation and lack of speed and grip. I don't know what else to say. I love Dan.
Yeah.
He's awesome. But it just pains me to see this. And
Right.
I'll be honest, if I was Zach, I'd be looking at a way to get Oscar in that seat on all the remaining Friday practices to get
Yeah.
him seat time. I would.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you. I don't know what to do about Dan. I don't know if it is a lost cause, but
Yeah.
obviously once he left Red Bull, he really didn't have that same pace
Right.
and situation that he did when he went to Alpine and then when he jumped to McLaren that you'd expect. So
Yeah.
it could still be in there, and maybe it's something the team are doing to not bring it to him. Maybe it's his approach just doesn't gel well. That does happen with certain teams, but it's definitely not going to stay working at McLaren. So it's best for him to go somewhere else to hopefully bring something back. But yeah, your future is Piastri at this point. So you're already paying Dan to sit out. I don't know. do you bring Piastri
I
even
would.
to race sooner than not? I
Yeah.
mean, get him a couple of races for the end of the season so he
Well,
knows what to expect.
I'm assuming the contract would prevent that, but it may not prevent Friday practicing. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's probably already in a contract too, I would think, how many times you give up your car.
yeah, it probably is.
Yeah.
So it may not be possible, but with performances like this, if I'm Zach, I said, look, dude, and Dan ain't gonna want to give up Friday practice either because he's looking for a job.
Right.
There's a part of me that says, I don't, for whatever reason, I don't feel like Dan's ever really got on top of these new cars, new regulations, new engines, the tires.
Yeah.
There's something going on. And there's a part of me that thinks, I hate to see a guy like Dan struggle in Formula One under this formula. Go to WEC,
Mm-hmm.
and his personality, everything would gel there. He would be awesome at sports car on a world stage like that. I think he'd be able
Yeah.
Of course, he'd probably love to go to NASCAR,
He would, but he said he's not ready to go. And I think, you're driving the fastest car in the world,
Yeah, I get that.
And like
But-
Kimi stayed on longer because he just liked driving
Yeah,
the
he liked
fastest
it.
car, not because maybe he had a chance at winning a race. But
Right.
yeah, it's a tough one.
It
'Cause
is
when
a tough one.
even though we love LMP cars and even Indy cars,
They're awesome.
the performance isn't there, right? The racing is a bit better maybe, and certainly will be in sports cars soon. That's going to be phenomenal. But
Yeah.
yeah, just to see.
No,
how,
I
like,
understand it doesn't have the panache and the speed and all
Mhm.
that, but he's right now, he's struggling to handle all that,
right
in that
mentally.
formula.
I think, yeah, I think if you did jump somewhere else, you would find it enlightening.
I do too. That's what I'm
And the-
saying. I think he
but-
would do better at WEC, and he may enjoy life a lot better there, but
Yeah.
who knows? Because he's certainly not going to get the salary he's used to in Formula One.
Not
if he
even
finds a
close
seat.
to it.
Nowhere near it. Nowhere near it. Those days
Yeah.
are over. So why not shake it up and take whatever brand equity you have left and go to WEC and really get in behind a program?
Mhm.
And so who knows? All right, let's see quickly. Aston Martin, Lance Stroll P10, Sebastian Vettel P14. To be fair, I thought Lance had a really good weekend. Started with a good Q3 performance in qualifying, ended with a P10. There's a point that was good. I'm sure they want more than that, but Lance, I thought, on the balance, Paul, I thought Lance looked pretty good all weekend. Had the measure of Vettel, that's for sure. And he did a really good job of managing what ended up being a soft, medium, hard, soft three-stopper, And I think he's a young guy, new-ish to the sport, and I thought he did a good job.
Yep. It's been a bit to and fro when one's on, one's off, vice versa. But yeah, not bad, and scraped in a point, so that's good for him because Vettel's been kind of a little bit on top of him recently.
Yeah, he's short time in it. Seb all weekend, I don't know. It's not great because they're trying to overhaul AlphaTauri and the constructors, so Seb not scoring points doesn't help. Knowing that the undercut was strong, Seb boxed early, trying to make that undercut. Ultimately, it didn't pay off, and his poor qualifying on Sunday was really what put his race to bed. So. Let's see. AlphaTauri. Okay. Pierre Gasly, P11, Yuki Tsunoda, DNF. Now, let's talk about Yuki. I went back and I watched to take a look at the onboard, and you can clearly hear something off when he struggled to leave the pit for the second attempt. And as a rookie, I'm sure he wasn't. Well, I'm kind of impressed because at first he thought it was the wheel, but after he left on the second time, he said, I think maybe it's the diff. He did sort of key in on it eventually. And so it wasn't the tire, it was the differential, apparently. You could hear the car was not healthy. So if you're a conspiracy theory and you're one of the unfortunate that are lobbying attacks at Hannah Schmitz and Yuki and AlphaTauri, stop. Number one, that's incredibly base behavior. The second thing is just go watch the onboard. You'll hear it. You'll hear all the radio conversation. That's ridiculous. As for Red Bull faking it and orchestrating this to help Max, just think about it, folks. That's ludicrous. Is they would be risking being completely disqualified from the entire championship if that was true. And it just
Red Bull doesn't need it.
And that's just it. Given their massive points lead in both the driver and constructors, they don't need it. They
need AlphaTauri to be better for their own
money. Yes. Yeah. They need AlphaTauri in the points and above Aston Martin in the championship. So a DNF isn't helping them at all. Yeah. And Max doesn't need the help at all. It's just ridiculous. We really need to move on from the Abu Dhabi conspiracy and accusations. I mean, the mob destroyed Massey's life. Really, can we just move on now and get on and find a different target? Because this is just asinine. It's just so junior league to think that Red Bull would risk everything this year to help Max beat Lewis, who's not even in the title championship hunt. It's stupid.
Yeah. So when you're in the car, did that noise happen after the first stop?
It sounded a little wonky to me. Even
after the first stop,
on the first, it sounded a little different to me. And kind of right when he first started to report, there's a loose wheel or something. I think he could feel it for sure. Yeah, and it sounded a little different, and he stopped. But then when he restarted, you lose a reference. Right. And he made it back around. It seemed okay, but when he boxed and then pulled out, you could hear it really struggling.
Because if the diff was going all wonky and askew, I guess you could feel maybe that was a loose wheel or something like that. I was thinking maybe for some reason he got it wrong, and after the second time, because the car sits there for 30 seconds, everything can go wrong.
Yes, right.
Because he's soaking under 30 seconds. I mean, these cars are built to be moving, and the air channeling into everywhere, including the diff and everywhere. So you sit there for 30 seconds. It's, you're really lowering your percentage of actually getting that car to the finish to that point.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right, Paul. And if you're brand new to Formula One, if you go out to your car, you open the hood, you'll see your radiator and you see a fan you have in your car, and that fan will come on based on the temperature of the engine and cool the water. Formula One cars don't have that. There's no fans cooling radiators, so they rely exclusively on the airflow through the car over the radiators to keep that cool. And if they set for too long, then they can overheat.
And they live on the edge of that cooling too, because all that air cooling causes drag. So they literally bring it down to its nth degree to make the car fast. So.
It's how little cooling can we get? And cooling was a big deal in 2014 with these new engines. A huge deal.
So that's when the engine committee and the aero committee fight tooth and nail.
That's right.
Well, how hot can we get this engine? Come on, man. Let's
engine.
This I came up with this little radiator.
Right.
And we can go so fast in a straight line.
Yeah.
To make your engine reliable.
When I was talking to Ferrari, their engine guy, I was having lunch with him, and there was like this battle going on because they want all the louvers and all the inlets and everything they can get to keep that engine cooler. A cooler running engine is a happy engine, right? And better performing. And so they want all that. But the aero guys are in the aero department saying, no, close all those holes up. It's drag. I don't want any holes anywhere on this thing,
Yeah.
So it was a real battle, back and forth. So
yeah.
So anyway, all right. So Williams, oh yes, we're talking about Williams. Alex Albon P12, Nicholas Latifi P18. Alex run a long first stint to lap 21 on mediums. Gained, he moved up the field because he went long. But then the virtual safety car didn't help. That left him just outside of the points. Latifi, again, like Dan, I don't know what to say about Nicholas. Here's what he said. He said, quote, "It was just a race to forget, really. We've been really struggling with pace the whole weekend, and it's quite confusing to me as to why," end quote.
But it's not his chassis because they already changed that. So.
I don't know what to do.
I don't think there's anything to do. We're just going to ride this thing out till the season ends, I think.
Well, again, if I was Yost, and Nick DeVries is actually in the balance, I'd put him in on Fridays, if I could.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just silly. It's tough.
It's painful to watch. I feel bad
it's
for
painful.
him.
I do too. I do. I think Nicholas is probably a heck of a nice guy.
Yeah.
And he's probably a pretty tidy driver. Unfortunate.
I know Roman DeAngelis, our driver, knows him. Obviously, they're both Canadians, so super nice guy. So
I'm sure he is.
Yeah, I feel bad for him, but in the end, it's a sport, and you're not staying with it. And Albon's actually shown you the potential it can have. So
like Lando is at McLaren.
Right. Yeah. So you got to stay with him, and if you're not, then you're at risk.
Yes. Haas F1, Mick Schumacher P13, Kevin Magnussen P15. Not a lot to talk about here. Mick didn't get a very good start. Had a slow pit stop, he said. That dropped him out of the top 10. For Kevin, he just overcooked it early in the race, trying too hard, ran wide, clouded the wall, didn't damage the car. He still stayed in the race and finished back in P15. Yeah. He just said, well, it was just a wasted weekend for him, and it was his fault. So hands up. He fessed up.
Right.
Finally, Alfa Romeo, Valtteri Bottas, DNF had an engine issue that brought out the safety car. For Joe, P16, he had a good fight with Ricardo at the back, but said the late safety car really didn't help him at all. And only thing he had left at that point in time was a used set of softs. So, he couldn't. Really find the pace.
Some strategy on during the weekend. It's tough not to use as much tires to try and get to the Grand Prix and use the predicted amount of tires. But in a race like this, if you don't have anything in hand, then you're kind of out of options. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. All right. Well, that's how it finished. That's what we think about how it finished. Let's give away some awards. Shall we do that? Mm-hmm. All right. First one is Move of the Race. Oh, yeah, Paul. Move of the Race. Who'd you give it to?
I got it. I kind of know who you're picking, so I'm going to go with Michael Schumacher on Vettel. I thought that was a nice Mick Schumacher. Sorry, yes. Michael. Mick Schumacher on Vettel. I thought that was a nice little in-car footage there of those guys fighting tooth and nail. I know it wasn't for anything. I think Mick actually could have had a better race, unfortunately, for the slow pistol. I put him back, but I thought he was actually fairly handy around here, and it was just fun to watch those guys because I know they hang out outside the track, and a couple of times they've had issues on the track, so it's nice for them to actually be able to race against each other and take each other out. So
totally. Let's see, my move of the race is George diving in for softs. And making a case for it that the team bought. It's beautiful.
It is a beautiful
it was a great move by him, for sure. So
he is no stupid boy,
no. He's thinking, and all platitudes aside, George, we knew this by watching him at Williams. Remember when he's at Williams, that team was miserable, right? Mm-hmm. And we always admire how George could come out and not just say, boy, this team is just shite. And he wouldn't. He would come out and he would have positive things to say, and here's what we're trying to do. And he was a pro about it, and he's doing that now. Mm-hmm. But as well as I do, there is nothing in his person that thinks he is at that team to be Lewis's wingman. Nothing.
Right.
Nothing.
Right. Now, the rest of the team may have some different opinions. Certainly the fans have different opinions.
The fans do, and I think even maybe Toto does. But there is nothing about George that says, I'm just happy to be here and be Lewis's understudy. The hell with that. Mm-hmm. That's not happening. Nope. So very much like Lando with Daniel knocking his feet off the desk, I think I think George is there to do the same with Lewis, just as Lewis did with Fernando at McLaren. It's not unprecedented. All right, let's do donkey of the race. Oh yeah.
We'll do it live.
All right, Paul. Donkey of the race.
Well, we got to give it to the Ferrari team. At least Sainz's end of the garage.
Yeah.
Oof. That was a stinker. They were lucky to get away with any points at all after that schmozzle. Yeah.
That just
It was that all the orange flares. That was pretty bad too.
Oh yeah. That was kind of bad too.
Come on, people, control yourself.
Yeah, throwing the flares on the track. Come on. I mean, really?
You're winning. Are you protesting something? I don't know what you're doing.
Really?
Throwing stuff on the track. But,
why? Why?
Yeah.
Who does that?
Non-racing fans, in my mind.
I agree with you.
You know what I'm saying? I
totally agree with you.
It's great to see a lot of people there, but also, there's a percentage there are just there to be there.
You said
not really
far better than I did a few weeks ago when Grace and I were talking about this. You're absolutely right. These are non-racing fans because racing fans wouldn't be throwing crap on the track.
Right.
Mm-hmm. A lot can go wrong there, and they just wouldn't do that. I'm a racing fan. I would never go to a race, with a flare. Let's do it on the track. It just would never ever cross my mind. I can't believe they would do it.
I think every sport has it. Every big popular sport has their percentage of people are there just to kind of be obnoxious to some degree.
Yeah, I agree.
Unfortunately.
Let's go see the Formula One. Let's stay home. All right. And finally, it's Drive the Race. Yes. Oh, yeah.
We'll do it live.
That's right.
Get down.
Yep.
Get down.
One's
going to keep this boy down.
Drive the Race. What'd you have?
George Russell.
That's who I had.
He was behind Lando at the start. He fought his way through. He called the decision. Thinking clearly in his head. He made the moves and finished P2. It was awesome.
It was imagine, if you will, living in a world that was created for Lewis and going into that world and pulling in, and the machinations, like you said, the language he had to choose to get that team and to convince that team to box him for softs, knowing that. I mean, that's well played, George. Well played.
Yep.
Very much reminds me of Lewis at McLaren in 07. In Hungary and Monaco. Google it, you cheeky bastards. All right. Let's see. Mailbag.
You've got mail.
We have some mail. First up, our dear friend Gigi the Cat asked this, Paul. We have now had a single tire manufacturer in F1 since 2011, with new regulation changes taking effect this season, new engine regs coming in 2026. Is it time for more than one tire manufacturer? Hashtag tire wars. What do you think?
I mean, it's always time for tire wars, but it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
It's always time to see it. It's always time to cancel DRS. It's not going to happen. There's lots of, lots of things that would be great, but the governing body need to control the sport. And that is, as Grace always says, how do you control the sport? You control it through the tires. So they're controlling everything in that mode.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to see it, but I agree with you, Paul. I don't know that it'll happen.
Yeah.
He also had a second question. These oversized mirrors they tested at Zandvoort got me thinking, do you think the mirrors can be replaced with cameras in the cockpit screens, which is what your car has, does it not, Paul?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, and how does that work for you?
We do have mirrors also. It works great as long as the screen is still working.
Yeah.
Because like all electronics, sometimes they blink out. And, we have the same issue on our car as other of the GT3 cars do. Sometimes they fail. There's ways of doing your old defaults and bringing it back onto play, but you can't have solely that at your discretion. You still have to have the mirrors out there too. But I would absolutely say yes. You should. That should be an addition, but I don't think it can be a replacement.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's see. Mike Smith asked, I listened to an interview with Lando, and he stated that McLaren would not be competing for wins until 2024. This is probably a naive question, but I'll ask it anyway. Why? Why does it take a midfield team years to close the gap, especially this year with budget caps and rule changes? One would think it would be a clean slate for all the teams. Granted, not every team is going to have an Adrian Newey, but like the drivers, I would think that the talent level in shops is relatively equal. What do you think?
Well, I think
it's a great question, Mike.
Yes, it is a good question, but I think especially because of the budget caps is why they can't do it. The teams who have been on a roll, who have had larger budgets, they still had that budget last year.
Yeah.
This year is the first year, unless I've got it wrong, that they're really under those constraints. So those teams have already ahead of the game. Right. So even if now you're all brought down evil, they're still a few steps ahead, and it's going to still time will bring things closer, but it does take time. And that's why they're perceiving it taking a couple more years to actually get on the game, because they're going to slowly pull back what Mercedes and Red Bull have been able to do with their higher budgets, etc. So,
and one of the things, Mike, is if you have a deficit, let's say you're 7/10 off of Red Bull. That 7/10 is massive in Formula One time, and I don't mean to patronize you. Of course, you know that. But if you've got that 7/10, then you're digging out of a hole. And now with the cost cap, you don't have unlimited funds to dig yourself out of that hole quickly, right? Mm-hmm. But there are also so many permutations and variables. If you look at Red Bull, who bought Jaguar, what did it take them, Paul? 8 years, 7 years, 8 years to finally start winning races and championship. Mercedes bought Braun. That took them
at least 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years with Rosberg and Schumacher. It takes time for you to get the team assembled, the manufacturing, the genius and the aero, genius in the engine. It just takes a lot of time for all of that to gel.
And don't forget that the other teams aren't standing still.
Yeah, they're doing the same thing.
They're still moving forward with their car. They're not standing still and waiting for McLaren to catch up. Also, remember McLaren, for an example, were in serious money troubles. Zach's done a great job, but it wasn't that long ago where there was a McLaren out there without a sticker on it.
Yep.
Right. I mean, now there's stickers all over it, and that's thanks to Zach Brown, because he's a genius at that stuff. But
he is.
You know, that's what takes time.
Yeah.
You got to get the money, then you got to figure out what you want to do with it, and then you got to build the stuff, and then you got to get it right.
Yeah, so, that's right. Yeah. But great question, Mike. And it's not a naive question at all. It's a great question. Ryan asks, hey, folks, perhaps you could discuss this previously, so apologize if I'm asking an old question. What are your thoughts on converting race length from a distance of 200 miles to, say, a 90-minute race plus 1 lap, similar to other series? This would allow tracks like Monza to run a little longer, perhaps giving us more action, while shortening tracks runs in like Singapore, where the drivers often are exhausted and dehydrated at the end of the race. What do you think, Paul?
Well, I mean, the limitation is fuel. So all the race distances are predicted to allow the teams, and there's a preset amount of fuel they're allowed to start with, allow the teams to actually finish a race. And different tracks have different fuel usage per lap. So that's why Monza is full throttle for so long, it just sucks up the fuel. So that's why the laps are shorter. And then tracks like Singapore, which they're not on throttle, are on throttle for a lot less time, and definitely on full throttle for a lot less time, they can go a lot further on that same amount of fuel. And so that's why the race is that far. I don't mind the races being in different lengths, because I think it adds a different discipline to it. I think you're going to Singapore, this is going to be, an endurance race. That's great. Make it different than Monza. I agree with, I think the point Ryan's asking, Monza's too short. It is too short, right? But they can't just change the fuel tank size for Monza. Well, actually they could if they made them larger in general and then shrunk them from all the other races and made those races. But that's predominantly it's mandated by fuel usage for the cars, and they're mandated about a fuel capacity the Formula One teams are allowed to have. Yeah,
this is a similar question by Mr. Dreyer X8. he was asking very along the same lines. He was saying, well, watching Spa and wanting more than just 44 laps, it got me thinking about Singapore and how that race is a brutal marathon at 61
Right.
laps, being limited by the time allocation more than any other modern circuit to think of. He said, my question is how is a race length determined for a circuit? Is it decided by the venue, the FIA, or what? And also, picking your experience, has there been a race that's had its number of laps changed because the race was found to be too short or too long?
Yeah, I guess we kind of did answer that one.
Yeah, yeah, we kind of did.
Yeah, so yeah, it would. I think the only time they change it is when they find out that fuelage is, or as the rules for fuel usage is different. So they always try and get the cars to go as long as they can and make the race as long as they can.
Yeah, I don't remember. I mean, like Hungaroring, when they reprofiled that, as you say, you've got except for major circuit layout changes, that's the time I can think of. But if any of you veterans out there are listening, you can think of a race that changed the number of laps without no change to the track layout. Boy, one doesn't jump to mind to me. I can't think of one.
If they changed them, it would be 1 or 2 laps.
Yeah, it wouldn't be much.
The rule changes would change that more than anything else. So.
Yeah. It wouldn't be much. Great question, though. Fabio asks, who pays for broken engines? Considering how long I've been watching F1, I'm a bit embarrassed not to know, but I also can't find the info anywhere. Say Williams spent $20 million on 3 of their 4 PUs. If one of them craps out, who's liable? Will Merck replace them free of charge since the engine maintain it, the engineers maintain it, or is it buyer beware? Great question.
Yeah, it is buyer beware, but there's obviously a lot of conversations go on before you take on an engine, because it's not necessarily the engine that's the problem, it's the packaging. Yeah. And the Formula One team comes up with the packaging. Mercedes gives you the engine and they give you these parameters, and the team can choose or not choose to stick to those parameters or push the envelope a little bit. Usually if it's an extreme situation where there's multiple engines for, you put a new engine in and it goes away instantly, I would say there'd be a lot of cause for the manufacturer to supply that engine back free, but it really depends on usage. And why the incident was caused. And sometimes it's racing. It's like something breaks. It's a part of racing. We deal with Aston Martin and great reliability, but sometimes things just break, and it's some of these parts aren't even built by that manufacturer. They're part of the homologation package. So some things I don't think is ever queried, but I think unless it's unless it's something really stark, I think that the team has a contract for a certain amount of engines over the year. It may be 5, even though the rules are 3. Right. The team may have a 5 engine allocation as part of their deal. They go beyond that, then I think the manufacturer and the team are going to start talking back and forth why these things are happening.
They're blowing. Yeah, right. Great question, though. Chris Benz asks, this question is for both, but mostly the international, and that means you, Paul. Do you think stopping radio calls and communication between the driver and the team during the race would put more of the skill and racecraft onus onto the drivers? They can do pit boards like MotoGP. I know they limited what they can say, and we all know that they have workarounds for that. What do you think of a driver being alone in a sense for the race would help the drivers show their true skill and racecraft? He says, huge fan and thanks for all the work and effort you do to the podcast over the years. I've been listening for 12 years. I'm sorry. You've been enduring us for 12 years, Chris. Great question.
I'd say congratulations.
Yes, congratulations, Chris. Yeah. Good choice. 12 years. It's amazing. Yeah. You've chosen the right podcast. You've chosen wisely.
Yes.
What do you think, Paul? No radio?
I don't think no radio. I think they tried to do that a little bit, and it kind of hurt them in the back. For safety's sake, if there's something wrong with the car, you can't have radio silence and messages go back and forth.
Blue flag messages, yellow flag.
Yeah, and I've talked about it before. I would prefer there less places that the driver can change on the car for the team to be able to communicate those changes and allow the driver's skill to come into play. If you've got 10 different diff options that at your fingertips, you can fix most woes in the car. But if you don't have any diff change options, and the team and driver have to agree on a diff for the race. Sorry, that was my Will Buxton impersonation. So then the driver has to drive around the to's and fro's of the performance of the car with that package. I think there's too many parameters that the driver can change in a lap, in a corner, to try and fix woes in the car. And I think a driver, when we started racing, it was like you could change the brake bias, right? And you could change a couple other things, and that was about it. And the driver had to make up the deficit and the changes in the car and changing the tires for that. I would much see that brought into the cars rather than, just radio silence.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Good question, Chris. Thanks for listening for so long. And then finally, Anthony asks, I was listening to the last pod and the engine penalty discussion, and it struck me, rather than penalize the teams for exceeding the limit, is there any merit in rewarding for less use? I.e., if at the end of the season, the teams only use 4 PUs, they get a bonus points. Less points for 5, none for 6. Thoughts?
That's an interesting thought.
It is an interesting thought.
Usually they don't go for adding points for non-competitive performances, right? Not for endurance performances.
Right.
But I get where he's going.
Yeah. I love the thought.
The worst idea in the world. I just know they wouldn't do it because of that. You have to earn your points on the competitive stage out there on the track, not just by not using something. The ND, we talked about the engine allocation thing a little bit before, where it's a little it was very unrealistic
for this number of races. Yeah,
but it's where do you draw the line? Yeah, because that line's always going to be broken. Do you say 3 and you get 5? Do you say 5 you get 7? But it's a nice thought, and it would probably help some of the lesser teams. Yeah. Because then, if you're fighting for 1 point in the year, then maybe that's the way you do it, and you have some kind of strategy towards it.
If you're Williams, just use 3 engines of the year, and you get bonus points of 5. Woo! Yeah. Now I get millions of dollars in prize money.
Yeah, but ultimately, racing is about going fast and finishing ahead of your competitor, not by not using opponents. So, but I do appreciate the thought. I do.
Yeah, I do
too. Have me thinking.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. I mean, in endurance racing, it's a different deal, but this is sprint racing too. So you want them to get out, go as fast as they can for as long as they can. Yeah. Like Mercedes did this weekend. That's what, George said, we could push the entire weekend with our tires. And it was great fun to be able to push the entire race, which usually you can't. So anyway, all right, that does it for this podcast. And be sure to be back next weekend where we go to Monza.
Episode 800. Wow, that's very fitting, isn't it?
800. It is. It is. Yeah. It's very fitting. Our 800th episode at Monza, Italy. Yes, it's very fitting. I like it. So be sure to join Paul and I next week, and we will unpack the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. Huge thank you to our Patreon supporters. We could not and would not do this without you, so very grateful for your support. Thank you for doing that. If you like the podcast, go over to iTunes, give us a good rating, give us a little love over there. We appreciate that. And until next week, when we do it all over again, this is Todd, a.k.a. Negative Camper, saying so long.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.